Hello everyone, and welcome. Yes, my name is Arafire, and welcome to another episode of a series that I still haven't thought up of a name of. But today we are talking about all things Starscream. Well, really, we're asking one particular question. Is Starscream a villain or an anti-hero? More one than the other, bit of both. Let's look into the character itself. So Starscream's always been one of the more devious of the Transformers. Now let's look into that a little bit. He is originally a scientist pre-war, and his scientific knowledge or his desires or his aspirations quickly fell away with the lust of glory, power, recognition, fame through warfare, with a tenuous relationship with Megatron, who he admires to a point, and I like to think Megatron admires him and respects him. But Starscream will more than happy throw him under the bus to become leader of the Decepticons. You can look at this one of two ways. You could say, is Starscream looking to overthrow Megatron in particular, or is Starscream looking to become leader at all costs? Is the thrill of overthrowing Megatron more important than, say, if it were a Galvatron, a Shockwave, a Soundwave? There's very much high aspirations for himself. With that, you couldn't help but like him. He was the standout character, and creating civil war tendencies is always quite interesting in any series when there's dissension in the ranks. How it wasn't always Autobots versus Decepticons, it was sometimes the Decepticons versus each other. It made Starscream an interesting character when he was already interesting. He had the tendency to go out on his own, and that's where I think the anti-hero of Starscream comes into it. For anyone who needs clarification, anti-hero meaning still doing bad things, but you like the bad things that they're doing, or they're doing it for a greater good, but it's still a bad thing in the process, than a rather outright villain. So looking at other instances for Starscream to turn face, if you'll pardon the wrestling term, is that he has very few tendencies to be good and do things nice. They are very few and far between, but some instances come into the Armada series in how he almost becomes an Autobot. There is a crisis of conscience, and the end of the Unicron trilogy itself, he dies with a very noble end, and this is where I think you see a real complex side of Starscream. We spend so many years believing it's a villainous side, and there's good reason to suspect so, that when there is a chance, the slightest glimmer that he has a chance to do something good and he does it, it's all the more rare. It's actually quite nice and sweet to get to. But we often see an anti-hero more than just an outright good guy. Many series, however, do not portray Starscream in a good light. You've just got to look at, say, Cyberverse, you've got to look at Prime, you've got to look at the majority of comics, and I'll get to Skybound in a minute, but a lot of it is Starscream out for himself, and that's his core, that's his story, that no matter what, that he will be true to himself, true to his own agenda, his own aspirations of really just being leader of the Decepticons or of a free Cybertron, whatever that may be. So when does this go from outright villainy? So looking at the live action movies, Starscream was little more than a lackey. He was little more than a soldier. He didn't even threaten to overthrow Megatron much, so we'll put that firmly in the villain camp. If you look at, say, the Generation 1 cartoon, he was an outright villain. He wasn't really portrayed to be anything else, and he was a cool character. That's why he's so popular. But I wouldn't say there's too much anti-hero stuff going on, other than the fact that he did some fun stuff. He created his own Combiner team, and you had Bruticus versus Devastator overthrowing Megatron. It was cool, but I don't think we saw too much here threatening to turn into a nice guy, or even remotely close to it. So I'd say that is going to be a villainy side as well. Armada put into anti-hero because he more or less becomes a good guy. That one certainly has a deep crisis of conscience there. IDW is an interesting one. Starscream goes on a very single track journey in as much as he becomes the chosen one, he becomes the outright leader of Cybertron. But I think when you look at Starscream's story arc conclusion, his redemption. I've said before, IDW is a long redemption story for a lot of Transformers, that with Starscream seeing what he could have been, his true form, in a constant bickering with Windblade, that is real anti-hero going into a good guy, and how he willingly goes through his own agenda at the end. He tells all in a grand stage, and that is straight into the anti-hero, if not better, category. I think that is one of the better plays of Starscream, and again, it's very rare that he tells all, that he announces his plan, and all of the deviousness and the arranging hits, or whatever you want to call it, kind of fell away to a good conscience coming through. But that being said, we've never really seen, aside from Armada, Starscream go full Autobot, full good guy. It doesn't particularly happen, and arguably doesn't need to. He's an interesting character in his own right. He's actually much more capable of leading a splinter faction of Decepticons than he would be joining the Autobots and falling in line with the others. You can't see him lining up with the aerial bots, becoming a Autobot seeker if you like, lining up once again in Jetfire. You know it would end badly very quickly. You look at the War for Cybertron series on Netflix, again, not really much in terms of an anti-hero or good guy there. It was much more out for the deviousness and how he was promoted to become leader of the Seekers in place of Jetfire. So there is the villainous side within. And again, looking at Skybound. Well, if any of you have read the first comic from Skybound, number 1 of the Transformers, the last panel really tells you where they're going with Starscream. There is no difference here. This is going to be an evil Starscream. And this is kind of what the Decepticons are, what they were always intended to be, and how they weren't going to be nicey-nicey or soft villains. This is the Starscream we're going to expect. I won't go into too much in case people haven't read it, but that's what we're going to expect from Starscream and things to come. Personally, I like Starscream as an anti-hero. I like the Civil War rivalry. Whilst I think it would be interesting if Starscream were to join the Autobots, even if it was for a short period of time, I couldn't see it lasting even from the outset. I think it's much more likely to create a fraction of the Decepticons, doing a splinter group off, even if it was just Seeker related or a handful of others, that more or less has been done before. Taking the likes of the Combaticons away and having a Starscream's Brigade. It's all coming back to the G1 episode. But it's quite a complex character. When you look at the ones such as Shockwave, who is enough to talk about in his own right, and I've done that before, but if you talk about Soundwave as well, there's pure loyalty there, standing alongside a Decepticon cause. Even in IDW, it's very single track. Starscream has always had more, because you never quite know which direction he was going. Even if his agenda is, I am now the leader of the Decepticons, you knew he was probably going to be devious. You never knew what the plans were. Particularly if you look at IDW. You look at the options he could go down, whether it's stealing the Matrix, raising a dead Titan, whether it's vying for political power, burying Megatron in a public setting, or just outright being a murderer. This is a very complex character and one of the more beloved Transformer characters out there that offers a lot of avenues to explore in storyline development. And this is why I say, and my question to you all, is Starscream a villain, or an anti-hero, or somewhere in between? But there you go. What do you guys think? Please leave a note in the comments below. I think whatever continuity you look at, Starscream is one of the more complicated and in-depth characters that can be used and called upon to really be a staple character, be it in the Fall of Cybertron games and how he's a big deal in any continuity that he comes into. He is a recognisable name, he's a talent, he has a desire that burns through to see him excel to the top of the ranks, to the view that the other Seekers base their designs off their leader, off Starscream, which, you think of it, gives the amount of power and respect, if that's the right word, that he has as the character himself. But where does his decisions take him? Where does that lie in the hearts of the fans? So I'd love to know your views. But thanks for watching, and as always, I will see you on the next one.